A week of L's for Norwich City. Leeds away, Liverpool in the FA Cup. 1-0 defeat, 5-2 defeat. And maybe it's taken a little bit of wind out of their sails, but hopefully not too much. Welcome to this week's edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast, brought to you in association with Coleman's of Norwich, producing the very best mustard in the land. I'm Connor Southwell, joined by Adam, Harvey, Paddy Davitt and Samuel Seaman to reflect on what's been a very busy week. Got loads and loads to talk about, from obviously 2 games, a lack of transfers, but not a lack of substance in terms of speak about transfers. We've got we were at Old Trafford for the under-21s game. There's loads and loads and loads to delve into, but I think we'll start with the games that were, and we'll rattle through them. So we'll start with Leeds first and foremost. Adam, let's start with you to kick us off. I mean, Leeds, this was a hastily arranged game, but one probably everyone left with, I don't know if positive is a stretch, but certainly not feeling too downbeat in the end about a 1-0 defeat at Elland Road.
No, I think given their home record, which is been well documented, yet to lose at Elland Road all season, I thought Norwich gave a relatively good account of themselves, albeit didn't really create the chances they needed to really threaten the Leeds goal. You could see that clinical nature in the Leeds finish that Bamford, of course, buried against his former club. But, Leeds are going to be up amongst the top 2 mix come the end of the season. It's not the kind of game that Norwich required the 3 points from if they're going to try and push towards the playoffs. It's that those teams around them, the ones that are coming up now, the likes of Coventry, Watford, that are going to be so crucial in where this season goes from now on. But, there was positives to take. I thought, given other sides have gone to Elland Road and struggled a lot more this season, even Ipswich went there and got dominated by 4-0 and put a really poor showing in. So in that sense, there's definitely positives to take moving forwards into what's now sort of a really crucial last 17 games of the season.
Yeah, there's been lots of points made, Paddy, hasn't there, in terms of from David Wagner at different points of the season about what he wants to see his side improve on. At one stage, obviously, and we've spoken about it at great length, they were conceding 2 goals a game. They've obviously significantly reduced that prior to yesterday's FA Cup defeat. And then he's kind of shifted to speak about possession. And what we saw at Leeds really was, particularly in that second half, a prolonged spell of possession, but probably a lack of substance behind that possession. Is that fair?
One thing at a time, Connor. We've got to put the bricks back in place, haven't we? We've got the defensive resolution. We've got the midfield possession. Tongue firmly planted in cheek because the sample's far too small. So now we'll worry about the top end of the pitch. To be fair, though, I wish I had the stat to mind, but are they the biggest or the top scorers in the Championship? I think they are. If not, they're up there, aren't they? In terms of, I think I heard that yesterday around the FA Cup coverage. Yeah, but I mean that just underlines that. Yes, on that particular occasion, you're right. They didn't really, and David was the first to admit it after the game at Elland Road that night. They didn't have that cutting edge, but over the piece, given Sargent's been out for a prolonged period as well, and Barnes to a lesser degree, they certainly have carried a goal threat. So again, it feels more of the elements are there, or the pieces of the jigsaw are there, but are they getting put together in a fashion that over a long period of time, i.e., a full Championship season to this point anyway, would lead you to believe that yes, this group of players under this head coach are now ready, set up, and they're going to get stronger from here. I don't think we can say that with any certainty, really, albeit. Yes, in isolation, what we saw on the ball at Leeds in that second half, particularly against the Uber possession coach, as we know, in Daniel Farker, was positive. Nunes and McLean really set the tone, and they condensed the play, they squeezed the pitch. Leeds maybe sat back a touch, but I think it was more about what Norwich did rather than Leeds in that facet of the game. But I think you put a stat out after the game, Connor, that touches in the box for Sargent were pretty minimal, and just entries into the final third were pretty poor as well. And so clearly they didn't get all the elements right. But having David Wagner talked about, look, we need to work on possession now a little bit more, I think, which was post the Southampton game, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, that is evidence that they have worked on that. But again, we're now very soon into February of a season that started in August with a pre-season before that. Should we be at this stage still be in the experimentation phase? Definitely not for me. So something's gone badly wrong there.
Yeah, just to pick up. So Leeds are the third joint top goal scorers behind Southampton and Leicester. They've scored 51. Southampton have scored 53. Leicester 56. But they are second in terms of goals against. And I think the win against Norwich made it 4 wins in a row, 3 wins in a row, 4 wins in a row. So that it was always going to be difficult going to Ellen Road. And it's interesting, Sam, because I think a word that's been used a lot this season when speaking about Norwich City is control or lack of control. And there has been this kind of idea that possession equates to control. You can have controls in football in lots of different ways. Ask Diego Simeone at Atletico Madrid. They do it very differently. They have control of games without the ball and control where their opposition have the ball. And I did feel there was an element of that about this Leeds game. It was a case of Leeds allowing Norwich the ball in areas where they weren't really going to hurt them. And I know the Ellen Road crowd were getting a little bit frustrated, but it proved quite effective in the end. And we know we've seen it over a long period of time with Daniel Farke's sides. They aren't always the best at pressing. So maybe that's to be expected. And you touched upon it there, Paddy. I mean, for the Leeds game, despite all of the second half possession, Norwich only had 7 touches in Leeds box, and Josh Sargent and John Rowe didn't have a single touch in there at all. Leeds actually had 27. They only produced 1 shot in the second half, and it was Nunez from range and was blocked. So Meslier didn't really have a save to make. So yes, it was better that we saw more quality, and this will probably lend and contradict when we talk about Sunday's game at Anfield. But we did see an improvement with the ball, Sam, but probably just not quite in the right areas. They weren't able to connect that possession and quality with the ball to their attacking players to hurt Leeds in a way that maybe they should have done with the amount of ball that they saw.
Yeah, we've been speaking for ages about whether Wagner has sort of the players to play a more proactive system than he currently is, and whether some of those better players are being used in the proper way. And I think this showed in some ways that they do have the capabilities to sort of keep possession and do it that way if they'd like to. I thought Marcelino Nunez, especially, and there are a couple of other players out there that showed that they would be more comfortable in that sort of situation. But the reason why Leeds were able to control the game in that fashion and able to allow Norwich to have so much possession is because I don't think they really know what they're doing in that type of situation. I think I've spoken about it a couple of times since the game, really, that if you want to set up the way that David Wagner does, how much time do you actually spend in training sort of dedicated to what you do when you're in control possession and when you have long spells on the ball like they did? I'd suggest, given the way that things have looked recently, that you probably don't spend much time on that. So as much as I thought there were players that actually looked like they could sort of thrive in that environment and could produce something, I think part of the reason why they struggle to do that is because they're so out of practice and they're probably out of a system that really has a plan as to how they're going to exploit sort of situations like that. So as much as, you spoke about it there, really, you could, on the face of it, just look at it as a positive, and the fact that Norwich managed to dominate possession against such a good side for such an extended spell. But I think the weaknesses at the moment and the way that they play were probably what allowed Leeds to do that, and what allowed Leeds to sort of control that game. So yeah, in the long term, I think it actually posed quite a few questions. It was actually strange to sort of see Norwich in that situation. It feels like such a long time since we've watched a Norwich team that can actually just keep the ball for 2 or 3 minutes and can frustrate a home support. And had they been able to do that for a really long period of time, if that was their sort of system and the way that they tried to break down teams, I think they might have had a little bit more success. But as I said, they're so out of practice, they just didn't really look like they knew how to take it up a gear and turn that dominance in possession into actual tangible chances.
Yeah, and I guess the point, Adam, from this game is and this is where David Wagner's head is at, and this is where I guess other people's head will be at, is that actually if they have those spells of possessions against teams that aren't Leeds United and maybe don't have the quality defensively or individually and can't hurt them in transition in the way that Leeds did in that second half and first half as well, to be fair, then it probably shows that this is a group of players who can go and impose themselves on games a little bit more, particularly at Carrow Road, particularly against maybe teams who are towards the wrong end of the table or certainly aren't in that breakaway top 4 that we're seeing at the moment. So I think it's fair to say it was probably a performance that encouraged hope that maybe this is a Norwich team, as Paddy referenced it, maybe albeit a little bit too slowly, but one that is slowly and gradually improving and has done over the last few weeks.
Yeah, I think the key is replication of this performance now against those sides in and around them that they need to get the points against. Most sides aren't going to have a £36 million striker in their ranks, like Leeds United did in the form of Ruta, who's, a class above this level. As much as teams like Coventry and Watford have got good quality players, they're probably still quite a long way away from the quality that Leeds had, particularly given the kind of aspect of it being away from home at Ellen Road as well. That sort of added into the difficulty, but in some ways more encouragement there from a Norwich City perspective in the way they performed. And I think the home crowd will now want to see that, given the sort of way that the Southampton game at home transpired and the lack of possession and just kind of that one clinical chance they had and Sargent taking it. I think Norwich fans, are going to want to see that similar performance that they got at Leeds in the home games. It will, I suppose, give confidence to the fans. The excitement levels will raise, and then hopefully, that unity that David Wagner speaks about could create something quite special come the end of the season. It's going to be difficult, and Norwich have still got a lot of work to do. To try and catch up to the sides above them, particularly given Coventry will have played another game by the time we reach Saturday. They might be 5 points ahead of Norwich, so it would feel like a sort of win or bust situation again, which we've kind of been sort of feeling, I suppose, for recent weeks. So but positive signs, in that game, and hopefully they can take that forward and replicate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that parks Leeds, unless anyone wants to shout about anything else. Gabriel Sara and Kenny McLean missing some pretty key chances in the first half, particularly Gabriel Sara. If he scores that one, I think it becomes a slightly different game. Let's move on to Anfield then. 5-2 defeat for Norwich City, and it was always going to be tough. You look at the names and the fact that Liverpool could make a triple change that saw Robertson, Soboslai, and who's the other one? It was one
Van
in the front.
Dijk.
That's it. And Van Dijk came on. Alexander-Arnold came on later.
Diaz.
I mean, that was their 5 substitutes, let alone their starting 11. I mean, it's an embarrassment of riches available to Jurgen Klopp, who is seemingly running out of energy at Anfield, and he's going to step down at the end of the season. This was the beginning of his Elton John-esque farewell tour in terms of length. What did you make of it, Paddy? Because again, I think you can accept all of that context, can't you, in terms of Liverpool's quality, top of the Premier League. Loads of teams go to Anfield and get beaten quite comprehensively. But there will be, I think, and Ben Gibson alluded to this after the game, there probably will be that nagging feeling that a lot of what Norwich City did was handing goals to Liverpool on a silver platter.
That was what they did for the first 4 of the 5 anyway. Point I put to David after the game that it's not in doubt. You've listed the names there, but their front 3 was Gakpo, Darwin Núñez, and Jota. Now that's off the Richter in terms of what we're talking about. Leeds and their quality go up many a level again. So, and that was underlined for me. And it's not to single him out, but the third goal straight after halftime, critical period really. 2-1 Norwich are in that game. Gabby Zara's had a shot just gone wide of the near post. They're in that game. They're in that cup tie, and then just a diagonal that Gibson doesn't deal with. But the quality difference between the two leagues was graphically illustrated in what happened next. It was Diego Jota straight on the ball, not even a touch to control it. Bang, angled half volley past George Long into the opposite corner. Majestic. And Jurgen Klopp referenced that as probably the key moment in the tie, really, because after that they could slip a gear and they could bring the reinforcements onto the pitch. And bar Sainz's superb second goal for Norwich, it was pretty much the academic in terms of the outcome at that point. So yeah, we don't need to get hung up or stressed about Norwich weren't able to go to Anfield and pull off a surprise result. But you can't airbrush out that if you dissect the first 4 goals, sourced in amongst those excellent finishes were poor decision making. Poor in turnovers, poor decisions to jump instead of hang fire and leaving gaps, lack of communication, between players, the space that was afforded to some of those Liverpool players. It's not acceptable, really. It's not acceptable. Yes, you're going to get punished, and that's, you accept that when you go to these teams, but don't make it easy for them. It would be my take on it. And if they're going to beat you, they're going to put you to the sword, then they'll do it with the quality they possess. Don't, leave players like Núñez or Jones unmarked, Jota, let him run in behind, and you do that, then there's only going to be one outcome. So for me, that was the frustration that they were in that game. And okay, the way the game panned out, it was probably always going to end up with this outcome, i.e. Norwich out of the competition. But, you left there feeling, well, they probably made it a little bit too easy for Liverpool, as good as Liverpool are, and potentially will go on to prove it this season in, as you say, Klopp's farewell tour. I'll be amazed if they don't add a few more pieces of trophy silverware to that bulging Anfield trophy cabinet in that majestic stadium, which we experienced for the first time since the Anfield Road redevelopment. Dare I say it, I'm not sure when we'll be back there again.
No, quite. And I agree. I think for particularly, you referenced 4 of the goals, but there were some moments in there defensively, and yes, Liverpool have quality, but when teams have that quality, you want to be unlocked and you want to be conceding goals because of that quality, not because of deficiencies on the part of Norwich. And it kind of felt like that was more of the case. And ultimately, we've seen it as well. It doesn't matter if you're playing Liverpool, it doesn't matter if you're playing Plymouth. If you have those defensive deficiencies and you don't do the basics very well, you get beat, and you get beat pretty badly, and that's kind of what we've seen. Sam, what did you make about? So 2 things I wanted to ask you about, really: the decision from David Wagner to start with Ashley Barnes, and I think there's a logic there in terms of he obviously wanted to use him as a bit of a release or a relief valve almost to try and get Norwich up the pitch, to try and make the ball stick, and to try and help them a little bit transitionally. Of course, you can understand that thought process. The other idea really is to start with an Adam Idah to try and clip the ball into channels and try and turn Liverpool and stretch the game a little bit. And this idea that maybe then Liverpool take the ball in deeper areas and their sort of spells of possession begin maybe in their final third, or certainly in their own half compared to on the halfway line, and it relieves some of the pressure. So look, maybe it's a little bit of doing the same thing. But so that point first and foremost. And then there's been lots of stuff about Norwich City's possession and trying to play out from the back, and I think we saw it for the second goal. It cost them slightly. What did you make of both of those elements and kind of tactical decisions from David Wagner and his coaching team? Because we have seen at stages this season, I guess Southampton's the most graphic example, but there are others where Norwich have decided to move away from that kind of idea of playing out from the goalkeeper and trying to basically bait a press.
Yeah, the Barnes one I think I can understand slightly more, even though I think the problems with that decision were sort of laid bare, especially throughout the first half. I think Wagner probably wanted a more physical presence up there that's able to hold the ball up and get them up the pitch in a game where they probably couldn't rely on much possession and much dominance of the ball. I think although Idah looks like quite a physical presence and probably has the athleticism to run in behind, his touch isn't quite good enough to be a reliable striker when you need somebody to hold the ball up. So I sort of understood that. And there's also the elements of maybe Barnes having success against Klopp at Anfield before, and maybe the psychological elements of that. So although I might have gone a different way in terms of Idah being able to run in behind, I think I could understand that decision. But there were a number of times when you had the likes of Nunez and Sarah, even the fullbacks at times, look up and see the option in front of them being Ashley Barnes as the player who you might have to clip it in behind to try and find. And up against Kwanzaa and Canary at the back, there was absolutely no chance that if you just put the ball the other side of the defender that he was going to cause any sort of problem. By the time that, on the rare occasions that happened, by the time that the defender had got to the ball, Barnes was 3 or 4 yards away from them. And in that sense, I think it denied them an opportunity that they might have had at times to just put a ball into the channel or to try and play the ball in behind and have success that way. But as I said, I could sort of understand the decision, even if I wouldn't have made it myself. On the sort of passing out, I don't think it was the right decision just because of the quality of the opposition and the way that they play. I know it looked quite bad when Norwich were losing the ball sort of in their own defensive third quite often, but I think we tend to look at things through a purely sort of Norwich City prism at times, and this is one of the best teams in the world pressing wise. So as much as it's easy to criticise the basic mistakes the players were making, and I think there were defensive errors in terms of, Paddy mentioned the jumping out for that second goal, and Kenny McLean made an absolutely reckless decision in terms of trying to do that. Jones had too much space when he was found for the opener. But I think in terms of that passing out, if you've been told to do it, it's hard to really see how these mid-table championship players are going to get around one of the best presses in the world. And although it always looks like really poor mistakes, I think there was also a degree to which the Liverpool quality was unbelievable in the press. And I suppose when you consider that, it makes it an even stranger tactical decision. I think if it was under someone like Farke, where that's sort of the ideological way that you're going to set up, and you don't want to change that because you want the players to be performing it consistently week in, week out, then maybe I would be defending it in that sense. But under Wagner, where it's very much been changed depending on the game and go for the tactical approach that's most likely to get you a result, I wonder why he's chosen to do things that way. Maybe he felt that Liverpool press so high that you can sort of bait them in, as you said, and you can try and get around them and have space the other way. But if there was a way around Liverpool in that sense, they would definitely not be top of the Premier League, let alone in the FA Cup against a sort of mid-table Championship side. So tactically, I thought that was an interesting decision, and maybe one that compromised his players a little bit defensively. But I think when we look at the players and we criticise the mistakes, you have to also consider the opposition that they were facing and the fact that they probably were told to, well, they definitely were told to pass it out from the back from how they played. And I thought they were actually put in quite a tricky situation in that sense.
It was quite interesting to see Norwich City be more braver in possession and try and be more bolder than they were a couple of weeks ago when Southampton came to Carrow Road against a team who, as you said, significantly better. That does feel quite interesting. Whether it's the freedom of the cup that made David Wagner do it, I don't hate it in a sense, but equally I think you're right. There is people want to use the word naivety. I'm not sure if that's the correct one, but it definitely felt a little bit at odds given the climate and the situation that they were playing. I also felt as well the decision to go 4-5-1 left them sort of a man short on the defensive line, and that, as you saw for the first goal, because of the way that Liverpool pushed men forward. I think they might have actually been more suited to going with a back five in this occasion than they were against Southampton. But hey ho, it's easier job in hindsight, isn't it? Football management, and as Wagner has said himself, there are so many pros and cons to each tactical variation and decision and formation, and it's ultimately up to him to weigh it up. And I think they're worth talking about though. Adam, there was something for the 4,000 Norwich City fans to shout about. 2 goals, one from Borja Sainz, which was unbelievable, really brilliant strike. And the first one from Ben Gibson, which was a really well executed set piece. I spoke to him after the game. He's had a really difficult few months, and he spoke about that pretty openly to myself and then to Chris Coram afterwards. He's had a premature, or his daughter was born prematurely in December. She's been in the Norwich and Norfolk University Hospital, been in intensive care, all of those kind of aspects. Sounds like from what he was saying, she's on the mend, and I think they're hoping to get her home in the next couple of weeks. But those goals and those moments, it was wonderful for him personally, given everything that he's been through first and foremost, but then for the fans as well, because when you go to a place like Anfield and there's so little respite in terms of seeing your team have the ball and seeing your team maybe hurt Liverpool, to have those 2 moments felt quite good.
Yeah, particularly as well for Ben Gibson. I mean, the goal he scored at the point obviously got them level in the game. It was a crucial moment. It probably felt like if Liverpool went and scored a second at that point, it was definitely going to be game over. So the fact that he registered his first Norwich City goal was a great moment. He struggled with injuries, of course, in the past, and maybe sort of that's kind of held him back at different points. And it feels like he's maybe not been quite the same player ever since that sort of big injury he had at the end of the promotion season against Blackburn. But yeah, great moment for him personally, particularly given kind of his contractual situation. There's no guarantee that he'll be here next season. So to get off the mark in a Norwich shirt was nice. And of course, the Borja Sainz goal, which was something quite special. I thought he really impacted the game when he came off the bench, looked a real threat. A couple of times he carried the ball forward and it sort of looked like he was going to create something. And that moment, sort of as soon as it left his boot, you had a feeling it was going to hit the back of the net. And for those 4,000 fans that made the long trek up. I mean, I think a lot of them, I know me personally, thought if they scored a goal yesterday, it would have been a pretty good achievement. So to get two, there's not many teams that will go to Anfield and score 2 goals. Unfortunately, of course, they conceded 5, but that's just Liverpool and the animal that they are at Anfield as well. You know, they're a side that have only lost, I think, once since it'll be 2022 against Leeds about the October period. So they're just a different, different monster at home, and of course you've got the Jurgen Klopp element all in that as well. So I think most of those 4,000 Norwich fans can take the positives from that game. Relatively good atmosphere in the away end. Different points during the game, probably outsung a very sort of, I suppose, heightened Liverpool crowd given the news this week. It was probably a good moment, and I suppose a lot of those fans won't get to go to Anfield for quite a few years now potentially. Although we do seem to get Liverpool every season in the FA Cup, so I'm sure we'll be back there next season. So good occasion. Disappointed to obviously exit the FA Cup, but the Championship is the priority.
Yeah, it's. I think there's some sort of law somewhere that insists that Norwich must play Liverpool in a cup competition. It certainly felt like that the last few years, whether that's the FA Cup or the League Cup. Paddy, the decision from David Wagner to leave Josh Sargent at home. He didn't travel to Merseyside. He's obviously still coming back from a long-term injury that kept him out for a prolonged period of time. He did start against West Brom, scored, started at Leeds. Little less of an impact. I think we both felt he looked a little bit fatigued at Elland Road on Wednesday night. Given that there's a full week now between Norwich, or 6 days, but essentially a week between Norwich City's trip to Anfield and that game on Saturday against Coventry, can you understand the logic? Do you think Josh Sargent should have been included on the bench? Where are you at in terms of that decision? Because I think for a lot of people, certainly a lot of fans who maybe would have liked to have seen Josh Sargent, okay, if he couldn't start, maybe just take a place on the bench and try and impact the game later on.
Yeah, no, I can see that entirely. But by the same token, David Vardy has been very consistent in this sort of approach. Shane Duffy was injury related on Sunday, but there's games he's dipped out of this over the festive period where he'd gone from the starting 11 to out of the 20, and that was a management issue in terms of managing the body of a more experienced player. Sargent's different. His situation is this long injury layoff. I think it just underlines, which we all know, and which he's reaffirmed since he came back into the side and scored a couple of goals. He is the one indispensable figure now between where the season can potentially go and where many fear it probably will lap. But he is the difference, and it's been proven since he came back in. The difference, it's a transformational difference in terms of his impact on the players around him, what Wagner's trying to do out of possession, in possession. We've discussed here in this podcast about, and we'll get into him in more depth, no doubt, Adam Idah, but Barnes as well. And neither of those two, in the way David Wagner wants to go about the task of accumulating results for Norwich City, can offer what Josh Sargent can offer. So I think it was an ultra cautious approach with a player who he cannot afford to be without between now and the end of the season for what matters. It's not about cup progress, it's about league progress, hopefully, in terms of that top 6 dynamic. So no, I can understand it. I can understand both sides. Yeah, at least have him on the bench and you could give him 20 minutes. But what if he gets injured, hypothetically, in those 20 minutes? And then what would Wagner have been hit around the head with then, metaphorically? Why on earth did you risk him in that game when they had no realistic prospect of getting past Liverpool, and now he's out for the foreseeable? So no, I think that was probably the right call for me. But you're probably going to follow up with there was a debate there about maybe some of those younger players in terms of the bench dynamic. Why 2 keepers? Why Poeta when it's been made clear he's going? So back to you, Connor.
Yeah, well, we will come back to that in a moment because I've got an email to read and various different things to read from people who have got in touch actually about that very point, and I think it lends itself, because we were at the under-21s game on Saturday, to a sort of broader conversation. So I want to give it time in just a moment. But Sam, in terms of this week, just to cap it off as a whole, 2 defeats. I mean, where is your head at with it? Because it felt like Norwich had built up such a run of momentum. This was always, I think we spoke about it a lot on last week's pod, this was always going to be a really difficult week for them. Do you feel that they come out of it with any less momentum heading into what is a pretty pivotal Championship season? Do you think it's one that you can almost put in a box and lock away and you don't need to ever sort of touch it ever again? I mean, how do you kind of reflect on the week of 2 defeats for Norwich?
Yes, a really interesting one. I think as much as we'd love to say that you can put it in a box and that you can look at it rationally and say, okay, it was a trip to Leeds, who have been unbelievable at home, and it was a trip to Anfield, who are obviously top of the Premier League. I don't think, unfortunately, that human psychology really works like that, and you can just go back to West Brom and sort of retain the momentum that they had at that point. You know, I think there are certain elements in which they haven't taken much of a hit. I don't think fans are especially displeased with things, certainly on the pitch. You know, obviously we'll come on to transfers, and I think there might be some elements there that they struggle with. But in terms of on the pitch and the results that the team are getting, I don't think there's any frustration at the moment that wasn't there before, or they've lost any goodwill from the good run that they were building up going into this week. But somebody said to me yesterday when I was speaking to fans at Anfield, actually, and I thought it was a good point, that every time they seem to get sort of in and around the playoffs and just within sort of touching distance and a couple of points, that's when they seem to fall away. And whether that's luck or whether that's sort of a mentality issue, that's something that probably David Wagner's got to address, and address it quickly, because, you know, we keep going through these cycles of Norwich dropping off, and we talk all about the negatives, and then they sort of pick up again and get close to the playoffs, and we talk about whether they can actually do it and the fact that they're tracking in the right direction. None of that is going to matter if they finish 8th at the end of the season. You know, it's all about reaching the top 6, and although the improvement is good to see, and it's always, I think, encouraging as a football fan, if things aren't going especially well, if you can see them tracking in the right direction, then that's always a positive. But it feels like at the moment they're struggling to actually make that jump, and if they can't make that jump until the end of the season, then of course they'll fail to meet the objective they set at the start of it. So I think maybe addressing that issue is where they go next. But in terms of sort of the wider feeling around the club, and certainly around the team and how they're performing on the pitch, I don't think they would have taken much of a hit from two probably very understandable and quite predictable results this week, to be honest.
Adam, is it a week, and this it always feels slightly easy to say, but is it a week that I think will probably get reflected on a bit more after the Coventry game, irrespective, or maybe respective of how that goes, because they pick up a win, and it does feel like then you can just put it in a box, never talk about it, and leave it alone. And it was just, you know, Leeds and Liverpool, very, very tough. If you then get beat at home to Coventry, and we'll speak, hopefully, if we've got time, a little bit about that game later on, then it's one that probably gets reflected on as again, as Sam touches upon there, the one where the tide turned again, the one where we're talking about streaks again and form again. So it does feel like the next, as always, you know, to roll out a footballing cliche, the next game's the most important. But certainly, as to look back, it almost feels like we're going to have to wait for Coventry to really sort of assess how this week, and maybe the damage or not that this week has done.
Yeah, I feel like performances, you know, they're kind of graded almost at the start of the season, and you kind of get away with it a little bit more. But I think given kind of the nature of the championship at the moment, and how crucial it is to keep sort of close to the pack that's trying to, you know, push for those sort of final 2 places in the top 6, you can't really afford to lose ground. And you kind of look sort of maybe further back in the season. I mean, going off the back of the Leicester game at home, Norwich were relatively good that night. Then they went to Plymouth and got battered 6-2, and the mood was completely different after that game, maybe compared to the Leicester game during the week. So it feels kind of similar to that almost, in that, you know, if Norwich do lose on Saturday, all the positives would have probably drained away again. And given, you know, as we sort of I said earlier on, if Coventry win during the week, it'd be 8 points behind, and that feels like a really difficult task again to sort of claw back an extra 9 points on a side that's, you know, certainly on an upwards trajectory at the moment under Mark Robbins as well. So yeah, it's a really big game for their season, and one that I feel kind of in this kind of cycle that we're in at the moment, it's a little bit win or die, and you know, that might shift again, and after another 3 games if they go and get 3 more wins. But and this is going to rumble on a bit like last season. But yeah, certainly from the sort of fans' perspective, given it's a home game as well, that they've got to really be gunning for a win. And yeah, I think it's a big one, and the performance kind of on Saturday, if they just grind out a win, probably the performance maybe doesn't go under the microscope quite so much, maybe compared to the games that have just gone, where the performance was good but the results less so.
Yeah, so some big home games coming up, in particular Coventry, then QPR away, and then Watford at home, which again another team in and around them that is going to be pretty difficult. Now you alluded to it, Paddy. I wanted to read this email that John sent, a Norwich fan called John sent me last night. I hope you don't mind me reading it out, John. I'm sure you don't. he has said, I'm a season ticket holder and extremely concerned at the lack of progress / opportunity under David Wagner for our academy prospects. We've already lost Alex Matos as we failed to give him an opportunity, yet he was good enough to play for Chelsea. He did on limited occasions, but by the by, the same seems to be happening with Kenna Bow. What is the point in naming 2 goalkeepers on the bench at Liverpool? It seems our academy is now a separate entity with our summer signings preventing any opportunities. And that leads me on to another point, and this was one that was made elsewhere. Let me try and find it. So this is from Dan Emery, so a tweet from him, or whatever we call these things these days. In 3 FA Cup games, 2 against League One opposition, obviously Bristol Rovers over the original game and the replay, Norwich have handed a combined 3 starts to under 21 player, Callum Fisher once, John Rowe once, Liam Gibbs once, whereas players aged 30 or over were handed a combined 17 starts in those 3 games. Are people right to be concerned, Paddy, at the moment about the lack of opportunities that young players seem to be getting at Norwich City, given how key to the ethos and maybe even the sustainability of the club it is that those players are given a pathway?
Yes, that's the bottom line, because that runs counter that what you've quoted there from those fans is counter to what this club is all about and has been all about, certainly in the last period. And with Ben Napper's arrival and the sounds from him about lowering the age profile, that's implicitly saying that we need younger players, and they're not going to have the wherewithal to go and stock their squad, first team squad, with younger players in the market. You have to hothouse them and develop them. And anybody who's observed from a distance about the transformation at Colney, well, that's not about bricks and mortar, or it shouldn't just be about that. Shiny though those new buildings are, it's about people inside those buildings, whether it's coaching or whether it's talent, and developing that talent, because that is the only way this model works. It is the fundamental pillar within the structure, and everything from the arrival of the Atanasio group and Ben Napper is consistent with, we need to develop our own. And how do you develop, to pick up the emailer's point? You know, the final elements of the pathway, the most important elements are taking them from a development setting, dropping them into a first team setting, and they make that transition and they go on then and improve your first team in the short term interim period. And then, as we've seen, you know, we can list them all, from Aarons to Madison to Lewis's to Ben Godfrey. You then grow their profiles and their standing within the game to the point where you can sell them for many millions. And, you know, a player that you haven't had to pay relatively a huge amount to develop, you sell for many millions. You can then, if you have the right people in place in the right departments, can astutely reinvest that to make you better as a group, as a club moving forward. So none of that should be a revelation, because that's what the people inside the club have told us, that what this club is built on. And we've seen the practical evidence of that with those players I've already mentioned. The issue now, the concern, I'm sure, is post that wave of players, who's come through. John Rowe, is he the only one? So is that good enough hit rate for in the last 2, 3, 4 seasons? I would suggest it's not. They have now a clutch of younger players out on loan, so that there's maybe a sense that they're not quite ready yet in terms of being in and around it with Norwich. I'm thinking of Abu Kamara primarily, who's doing great things with Portsmouth. But even that, you know, I've talked about it in the last week or so, there's a very pertinent parallel with Barley Mumba. This time last year, he's ripping it up for League One level with Plymouth, goes on to, you know, individually win a lot of accolades, wins the league with Plymouth, comes back to Norwich. We all think last summer, right, here he is now. He's finally arrived in terms of his Norwich cycle. He's going to be a key player. David Wagner clearly didn't fancy him in the style of player he wanted for that part of his defensive unit. And he goes, and they use that funds to go and buy Christian Fashnacht. You know, is that developing your players, improving your squad? No, I would argue, with the greatest respect to Christian Fashnacht. So it's no guarantee. And I think this is the part of the equation that maybe is a concern. It rests on the head coach who's in charge at that given moment, as we did with Daniel Farker, to give these players the opportunity. It's one thing saying we've got all this great young talent. You need a head coach who's going to be bold and brave enough, because ultimately they will be judged by winning games of football. But can they integrate younger players while still winning games of football. And that was the genius, dare I say, of Farke in his best spells at Norwich, that he was able to marry the two together and blend it with experienced players around there, because this isn't one or the other. It's not we just need to pack our team or our match day squad with young players. No, you need experienced players in any dressing room and on the pitch, clearly. But it feels like, particularly after the back of last summer's recruitment, that the dial tipped too far the other way, and it really fundamentally seemed at odds with what this club has supposedly set up to do, which is to bring young players through and make that the core of your footballing philosophy. So yeah, it has to tilt back the other way now, and that's going to take time. And as I say, maybe what's happened in this window with younger players going out on loan with a view to coming back in and being part of it next summer is the first signal of that. But there could have been another signal at Anfield by, not naming two keepers on the bench, not having Poeta on the bench, who's not going to be anywhere near it, given less than 24 hours previous in the same part of the world, Norwich's 21s were all up there. So from a logistic point of view, would it have been an issue to get players to travel from Manchester to Liverpool to be on the bench? I mean, Ken Abbo, I see that scenario, given he's not potentially, it looks like, going to be here next summer. What is the value of Norwich letting him go on the bench at Anfield? So, okay, we can park that one there. But Montoya, the left back, the young Portuguese left back who's part of that development team, has produced some eye-catching numbers in terms of assists. We saw him at Old Trafford on Saturday. He looks very good going forward. I think defensively you'd have concerns about him. But zoom out, at the moment, McCallum and Yanulis, the two first-choice left-backs for Norwich, both out of contract this summer. There's no sign that they're going to have contracts renewed. So come the summer, those two are out of the building. What does your first-team left-back situation look like? Surely Montoya is part of that equation, as he's here at the minute, and he's the next cab off the rank, should you put it that way. So surely put him into that environment yesterday, even if it was only to be on the bench and get a taste for it, in that environment, that elite environment at Anfield against some elite players. Surely that, from a development point of view, makes more sense than Poeta on the bench. I put that directly to David after the game, and he said, yes, that was discussed, but they felt the players who'd played a lot of minutes on Saturday, there wasn't a lot of value in bringing them to Anfield. So, I don't agree with that view, and I don't think too many Norwich fans would do, but that has to be the accusation levelled at David Wagner at this moment in time. Does he trust these young players enough? And we could devote a complete pod to this topic. But Liam Gibbs, what has happened to Liam Gibbs? How has he been handled? Jayden Warner gets a little taste of it under David Wagner, has to be said. League and Cup debuts this season. Then he's nowhere near it, and now he's out on loan at Notts County. So it's all right saying this is our guiding light and this is what we're about as a football club. But the most important person in that equation for me is the head coach. And if the head coach doesn't buy into it in the here and now, then there is going to be a blockage to the pathway. And that needs to be unblocked, because if it's not, then sadly you'll get more Matoses and Ken Abbos off here.
Yeah, and the facts of this, since David Wagner has been Norwich City head coach, there's been two senior debuts, and that's Abu Kamara in a 1-0 defeat to Sheffield United in April, and that's Jayden Warner in November. I mean, if you want to contrast that with previous ones, obviously Daniel Farke gave a whole host of players their debut over a prolonged period of time, and there's talk of this, 26 is it debutants since however many years or whatever. Although I would counter that by saying how many of those have actually played more than 2 minutes, because you could probably shave quite a few of those off. Yes, I know that they were pointing towards John Rowe, but he was given his debut by Dean Smith. Tony Springett likewise. I mean, it's only those two in terms of pure numbers. And John Rowe, really, I mean, with his talent, he should have made it whoever the head coach was. And there's, again, a case to be made that actually if he was fit last season, he would have been involved. And you're right. I mean, I'll read what David Wagner said. You said, you asked him the question. He said, we discussed this, but it makes no sense for a player who played 90 minutes yesterday to be involved in this game. It's worth noting that Caleb Anson did play 90 minutes for the under-18s on Saturday at Aston Villa, and a very good win for the under-18s as well. And it's worth noting as well that Norwich always travel with 3 goalkeepers. So the idea that, a young player has been given an opportunity, yes, fine. He's a young player, he's on the bench, but 3 goalkeepers always travel. So he'd have got that experience anyway. Never going to get on the pitch. Like you said there, Paddy, it's a waste of a place, really. Norwich have essentially reduced themselves down from 9 subs to 8 subs. Then you throw in the fact Poeta, who I think we probably would expect, if all planets aligned, could leave the club before deadline day. That's another spot there that, again, could be wasted. what do you lose, even if you've got no intention of throwing these young players on the pitch? Finley Welsh, Montoya, you mentioned it there. Joe Duffy, who's had a very good season. Daniel Ogwuru, the Manchester City, the young lad who came from Manchester City. There are loads of options there that you could throw on the bench, and I think this is the frustration that people have, Sam, because I guess what's the problem here? Is it a lack of talent from Norwich City's perspective, or is it a head coach that doesn't trust that talent? This is where ultimately this debate is at the moment, isn't it?
Well, it's really hard to judge because that under-21s division is so different to the actual senior level. I suppose there is a school of thought that David Wagner is paid to sort of make those judgments, but I think you look at the way that it's unfolding, and it is just a little bit of a vicious cycle. Yes, Norwich might not have the levels of quality that they had sort of in Farke's era, the likes of Godfrey and Cantwell and Jamal Lewis to bring into their team, but that quality is only going to diminish the more the pathway does so. And you look at obviously John from the email mentioned Alex Matos. It looks like Ken Abo is going to go the same way. And if those players are deciding that there's better futures for them elsewhere, how is it going to get better if this sort of pattern continues? This has only been a year, really, or just over a year of David Wagner being in charge and Norwich City having a head coach who doesn't really like to throw youth in. To Dean Smith's defence, yes, there are a lot of things that he got wrong in his time at Carrow Road, but he wasn't afraid to throw those young players in and introduce them to the first team setup. So after a year of David Wagner's stewardship, Norwich have lost, or looks like they're set to lose, two of their brightest young talents. If this goes on for 2, 3, 4 more years, how many of those players could they include in that? And I think I've seen a couple of arguments about the fact that when big clubs come in for players, there's basically nothing Norwich could do. There's an argument to say that Alex Matos got an offer from Chelsea. Which player would turn down Chelsea to stay at Norwich? But these players are, these big clubs have their eyes on so many players, and any key talent that Norwich have playing in Premier League 2, which is obviously the highest level of under-21 football, these big clubs will know about it. They are making offers for players at other clubs really consistently, but these players are looking at the pathway and saying, okay, is it best if I go to Chelsea or Arsenal and become part of this sort of meat grinder where there's it feels like hundreds of players at that level at times and almost get forgotten about? Or is it best to stay at Norwich, become a key player and go through the ranks that way? And I think it's alarming the extent to which players are actually thinking it's better to have their names associated with the big clubs than to try and get championship minutes for Norwich, because that doesn't feel feasible at the moment. There's no doubt these talents that have come through the Norwich academy system and played for their first team before have had interest and offers from bigger clubs. I think Cantwell spoke about interest from Arsenal in a recent interview, but because they saw this potential other route to success where they could establish themselves as first team names at Carrow Road and then try and make the move as a first team player, they were able to keep those talents. And I think that cycle of, do they have enough quality to impact the first team, and are they introducing enough players to the first team? They're only going to make each other worse, really. So, as I think both of you have said, really, it would have been worth just giving them that incentive and just chucking a couple of players onto the bench to show them that they are maybe closer to the first team environment than it feels that they might be at the moment. But it does all feel a little bit short-sighted, as I think we've seen from the club in various different ways over the last year or so. So it's definitely something that, with the model of this club, especially financially, and the fact that they weren't able to sell players enough to create that revenue in the last set of accounts, I think you can see in which direction it's heading, and whether it comes from Ben Napper or it comes from David Wagner, somebody needs to step in and sort that out, really.
Yeah, and you touched upon it there, this argument that when bigger clubs come in for these players, they're always going to have their head turned, and I accept that to an extent. But with Alex Matos and Ken Abo, they've had interest from these clubs all throughout their way in Norwich's academy, even from the point that they joined, and they were convinced to join Norwich City because of the pathway that they have. Connor Bow is his first senior contract that he signed for Norwich City. Chelsea were very much there and alive and wanted to sign him. Likewise for Alex Matos, they continued at Norwich and they invested in Norwich because they felt there was that progression to the first team. Now, the club will argue different things have happened and whatnot, and maybe they weren't ready or whatever, and someone has to make that judgment at some point. And look, maybe these players will never ever be good enough to play for Norwich City. Maybe that's the reality. But even way, if you're a club that kind of packages yourself as being self-funded, as being dependent on these youth players coming up, as Norwich City have done in recent times, that wants to shout about all the senior debuts that you give to players, then that has to be consistent. You have to be consistent with that as well, and it can't be this kind of blocking of pathways by moving away from that. And I guess this is, again, stems back to the criticism of their recruitment in the summer, Adam, doesn't it? Because they recruited a bunch of players that didn't align with what they were trying to be, and this is where this kind of confliction has come, and why a lot of fans are confused at the moment, because you can't say we're a club that really wants to play young players and then have, at one stage, as they did this season, 11 players over 13 in your squad. Those two things don't marry up.
No, it's been a concern of mine for a few seasons now. I know sort of when we had a brief sort of chat with Ben Napper off the record, I kind of mentioned that the lack of academy sort of players that have been brought through in recent seasons, because it feels like, like they're sort of brought up these numbers of the amount of players, but as you kind of alluded to, a lot of them have just been very brief minutes. The likes of Akin Famewa or Jordan Thomas. So he was just made a very brief appearance off the bench. I don't really categorise that in this is a player that's been given a firm pathway and is now developing into a first team regular for Norwich. And I think there's a lot of players in that academy that you can probably feel there's a growing frustration, because under the likes of Daniel Farker, they probably would have been given an opportunity by now. I mean, Jayden Warner's another one who I think has been massively mismanaged. He's 21 already and he's only now getting his first loan. And it feels like if this loan doesn't go to plan, then it's probably going to be one who's going to be pushed out the door, because he's effectively going to be getting to the point where he's not really a young player anymore, which is kind of a similar situation to where Adam Idah's at now, which I'm sure we're going to talk about that interest very shortly. But he's another player who probably needed a loan when he was 18, 19, go and get him some minutes in a men's senior environment where he can develop more than he would be able to in an under-21 scenario, or even off the bench for Norwich City, which has kind of been where he's predominantly been, that's where the majority of his Norwich City career has been spent, really. And that's it's disappointing, because I think there's a lot of talent in this group. And it feels like kind of the loan market or loan route was used so effectively back in maybe the Stuart Webber era. And I know they're sort of trying to do that now. You've got the likes of Brad Hills and Abu Kamara and those kind of characters all out on loan. But it's all about then when they get back through the Colney door, are they going to be given that opportunity in the first team? And at the moment, it doesn't really feel like under David Wagner that's going to be the case. And then they'll go and probably look for moves, and maybe they'll develop into very good players in the future that are effectively playing at a high level or at the same level as Norwich. And there'll be that sort of feeling, I suppose, amongst Norwich fans that they weren't given that opportunity to maybe play for their boyhood team, some of them, or players that have been in and around the group for many years, or at Colney for very years and developing. So yeah, I think there's an understandable frustration, and I probably share that frustration, with the fans in a lot of these 30-year-old players that Norwich have got at the moment are at the latter stages of their careers, and let's face it, they're not going to be here for the long term. These young players that are in the academy could have a long-term future / a sell-on value for Norwich, which given their financial situation, is so crucial that they try and maximise that. So yeah, understand the frustration, and hopefully it's something that Ben Napper's working on behind the scenes to find a pathway for these players.
And the key thing is what you said there. It's if these players aren't going to play, they need to raise money ultimately, and that's how you keep your academy sustainable. But it's either by producing youth products that develop into your first team. That's one route of productivity, and another is, I know Barley Mumble wasn't a Norwich City Academy graduate, but you could argue that they've done well there in order to get kind of profit on him. The fact that they're going to be losing, they've lost Matos, irrespective of whether you think he's good enough for the now or whatever, and they're going to lose Connor Bow as well in the summer. Both of those on free transfers. Okay, they've got a sell on for Matos, brilliant, great. But the fact they are going to lose both of those players on frees, I mean, if you're losing players of those kind of abilities, we all saw Kennebo play on Saturday. There's no way he should be playing in an under-21 league from what he displayed. He was, for me, and the Manchester United player scored 4 goals on Saturday. I felt he was the best player on the pitch, and there's no way you should be losing a player of that talent for nothing. That really does feel like a a crying shame. So yeah, there we go. But Paddy, I guess we could extend this even further and probably include Adam Idah in this, right? Because and his circumstances are a little bit different. But you've got a player there who's turning 23 next month. There is frustrations from his part, and probably understandably so, about again this kind of lack of regular game time, this lack of regular opportunity to start and to impact games from the off. And you've got a situation now where Norwich City have a loan offer on the table for him from Hellas Verona with an option to buy as well. I mean, if you're him at this stage of the career, given kind of what you've seen and what you've endured in the last few years, I mean, that's an opportunity you'd want to take, isn't it?
Well, I mean, certainly the loan element of that, because, if he's, and it ties into the Josh Sargent debate earlier on, if Josh Sargent stays fit, it'll be Josh Sargent and Ashley Barnes for here to the end of this championship season under this head coach. In that scenario, Adam Idah is far better getting out. Okay, they're struggling at the wrong end of Serie A, but apparently they've got Juventus coming up in a few weeks. So, do you want to sit on the bench for Norwich in the championship, or do you want to be on the pitch against Juventus and trying to prove that you are good enough to start games in a relatively high-profile league across Europe? I mean, it could, yeah. If I'm in the Idah camp, and probably the player himself, I'm looking at that as a springboard opportunity. Whether it's to come back to Norwich, having proven definitively now, look, I've gone away and I've scored goals in Serie A. Surely I'm coming back to, in all probability, a championship season. I have to have a more prominent role, and I don't think anybody internally could dispute that's the case if he went and did that. So props to him, because it could be the other way, and he could be, and there's plenty of players in the game at all age ranges now who are happy just to be in the squad and picking up decent money, have the security of a longer term contract. He doesn't want to do that. He wants to, at this age, be a regular first team player and not a super sub, dare I say it, which is kind of where he's getting himself bracketed now. And I don't think
is
any
it fair?
player
Is that a fair label that he's got?
Fair. Well, it's fair on the evidence of this season, because he's come off the bench and scored 6 or 7 times. So yes, he is a super sub. Is it fair that he should be bracketed as a super sub? Well, that's two things. That's on opportunities regularly to start games, which is out of his hands. But then when he gets an opportunity, he has to take it. And you could argue, certainly when Sargent got himself injured, and then Barnes subsequently got himself injured, that there was a run of games there, and we said at the time, this is his opportunity now. And did he grasp it? Probably not. But it wasn't all down to him. The team was going backwards collectively.
Scored more goals than Ashley Barnes this season. Scored more goals than Hwang this season. I mean, is there much more he could have done?
Well, for me, no. But ultimately, it comes back to the topic about development players and the pathways. That rests on the opinions of one individual. Effectively, his opinion is the last opinion that matters in this, and that's David Wagner. And if David Wagner, and we know, because the evidence is clear, when all three are available, who starts out of those two? It's not Adam Idah. So in the view of David Wagner, Adam Idah is his third choice striker. Is that fair? Well, it depends which side of the line you're on. And but fair or unfair, it's not going to change. Why would it now? Why would suddenly now Ashley Barnes out you come? I'm going Adam Idah and Josh Sargent, when he hitherto has not shown any inclination to do that. So fair or unfair, it's not going to change between now and the end of the season under this head coach. So if I'm in the Adam Idah camp, the decision's pretty clear. Do I want to play football? Yes. Do I want to start games regularly? Yes. I'm going to have to go elsewhere. And now the ball is very firmly in Norwich's court, because the problem is now we've got to this point in the window where I don't think if you're Norwich, you can really let him out because of the headcount. And David Wagner has been at pains to talk about headcount around the Pajeta decision, that he doesn't want to leave himself short, because purely in his terms, he wants as many available options as possible. That's understandable. But if you're Ben Napper, do you let Adam Idah go off to Italy and leave yourself with Sargent and Barnes? Because it's increasingly difficult to see how they could bring in another striker between now and who essentially would have to accept the same role as Adam Idah, i.e. you're coming in not to start games, my friend. You're coming in because we need a body. So what type of market does that open them up to? A very thin seam of players available, and the finances that would be involved to make that happen. So it's not a good situation now that's unfolding for any party in this drama. But yeah, it's hard to see how how it gets resolved for Adam Idah now in terms of Norwich, unless he goes and plays football elsewhere. So you can ask me, is it fair or not? I don't think that's really the debate. The debate is he now going to get an opportunity, not under this head coach.
No, it's a shame once again, and he's found himself in this position quite a lot throughout his Norwich career, that maybe the benefit of his development is probably going to be prevented because Norwich City need a body in, and that's kind of basically what his Norwich City career has been. He's been a body, he's been a support to Teemu Pukki, he's been, because they haven't been able to find anyone else, and those that they have found, Josip Dermic, Dennis Shrabeni, maybe even at points, barring Jordan Rhodes, who I think did a fairly good job in that role. All of those strikers have probably failed to do that to an extent. Even Josh Sargent, when he was in that role, was still playing games, albeit he was playing out wide. And I know he wasn't completely happy with that, but he was still playing games. Adam Idah hasn't really had that opportunity. And you look at the amount of minutes that he's played for someone who's going to turn 23 compared to your average 23-year-old at this age. Max Aarons is a very exceptional example, but is an example of if you get the pathway right and if you embed players in at the right time, you compare the amount of football that those two have got at the same points in their career, you can understand why he is so frustrated. Sam, we're limited for time. We're probably expecting, look, famous last words, but we're expecting it to be a relatively quiet end to the transfer window. Probably one for us to reflect on a little bit more next week when it is closed and we can look at it in the round of what they have and what they haven't done. But hypothetically, and we are dealing in the realms of hypotheticals at the moment, we're a little bit pressed for time. If this window shut right here, right now, and this was the business, Norwich City hadn't brought anyone in, they trimmed their squad with Forshaw departing and a few loans. How would you assess and review and feel that window has gone for Norwich City?
I think you'd have to view it as a failure, to be honest. I'm sure Wagner will try and spin it as a positive that they've kept Gabriel Sara and they've kept Jonathan Rowe. Obviously, if neither of those players exit, which feels likely. But there's been a lot of talk about a sort of a rebuild, a reset, a refresh of this squad. Really, Napper's talked about reducing the age profile. This was his first opportunity to do that, and although there haven't really been the requisite funds for Norwich to do much business, I think to go a whole window without making a single signing, and I suppose Jonathan Varane would be the one that feels most likely, and even that is pretty unlikely between now and the end of the window, certainly. But yeah, to come into a squad that clearly needs to change quite a lot and to do nothing in your first opportunity to do that, I think has to be seen as a disappointment, and I think the fans will see that as a disappointment. We spoke at the start of the window about the fact that it was Napper's first real opportunity to make any sort of mark. He came in and people were expecting Wagner to go, and that didn't happen, and there's not been any communication in terms of media really, apart from a very short interview at the start of his tenure. And this was his first opportunity to actually show some intention with actions, and although there wasn't much money available, not really much money available at all, they could have done something, and they could have been a little bit more proactive about doing something. And I think that, to be brutally honest, has to be viewed as a failure because they've failed to do anything at all. Getting Adam Forshaw off the books is a very minor positive, and obviously they've ended that Hwang loan, but they've still got 9 players over 30 on the books, and they haven't reduced that age profile at all by recruiting any younger players. So yeah, it's hard to really look for the positives aside from keeping Jonathan Rowe, which felt fairly likely given it's January anyway, to be honest. So yeah, although I'm sure Wagner will have some positives to tell us about when we ask him to assess the window, as he said he will. I don't really see that there are too many, and it's hard for me to really look at it with anything but disappointment, to be honest.
Just finally, Paddy, I wanted to clear up this point just because I've had a few people say to me, "Oh, you get to the end of January and Ben Napper's going to sit down and do a load of interviews and whatnot," which is news to me. I mean, just where are we at in terms of Ben Napper sitting down and doing any comms? Is there any plan from your perspective for that?
My perspective, yeah, I'd very much
well,
like.
What have you heard? What are you being told? Because we've asked the question.
Well, I mean, we will be formally requesting a sit down with Ben Napper. I can exclusively reveal that one. But in terms of, is there something actually in the pipeline? Well, if it is, it hasn't been communicated to us. I know other
Just
media have
plausible, but-
floated. Yeah, whether that means there is something and we're excluded. I wouldn't have
Yeah.
thought that would be the case, but I know other media have floated the idea and continue to float the idea. But in the here and now, no, I've not had any guidance from those who matter in this area inside the football club that when the window slams shut, to quote Sky Sports, we will be sitting down with Ben Napper to discuss matters, transfer window matters, more broadly about directions of travel. So that's TBC as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, good stuff. Just wanted to clarify that, and I don't think it's going to be a case of the window slamming shut. I think it'll be a case of someone gently coming in, just nudging it, and just putting the latch on come 11 o'clock on Thursday evening when it does close. But we'll be across it, of course, on all our relevant channels. Gents, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you all very much for listening. Thanks to our sponsors, Coleman's of Norwich, as well. We'll be back after next week's game at Carrow Road against Coventry, the Paddy Davitt derby, and we will reflect on all of that, and we'll bring the heat back, and we'll do all of that good stuff. There's too much to talk about this week to include that, so we'll bring it all back again next week. Enjoy your week. Norwich City quiet week really, but then a big game on Saturday. Thanks for watching and listening. See you soon.